She walked the aisle in October and never reached the end. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I'm your host, Harrington. Comment your city. I love hearing them, Wolfe begins. You can tell a lot about a person by the way they knock on a door. This one was polite. 2 quick taps followed by a pause long enough to show nerves. I was at my desk going over receipts from the orchid supplier, Wolfe's version of a financial crime, and was halfway through convincing myself to hide the bill when Fritz opened the front door. He doesn't usually need my help, but the voice that followed was the kind that made you put down your pencil. Soft, educated, and wearing the sort of restraint that means there's a story being strangled just behind it. Is Mr. Wolfe receiving visitors? Fritz hesitated just long enough to show she didn't fit the usual visitor profile, meaning not a lawyer, not a cop, and definitely not a friend of mine from the Flamingo Room. Then he ushered her in, and I got my first look. She was tall, wrapped in a brown wool coat that looked expensive without bragging about it, and she had the kind of stillness that comes from effort, every movement measured, every word prepared. The gloves came off first, folded carefully into her purse, followed by the look, half apology, half insistence, that meant she was here for business. "Mr. Wolfe?" she asked. I told her the truth. "He's upstairs with the orchids. I'm Archie Goodwin. He'll be down when he's good and ready." That earned a faint smile, like she'd read about him and didn't mind the delay. Most people don't. They mind later when they get billed for the time. She took the red chair near Wolfe's desk. Not the client chair. That one's in front of the desk, square on for when the formalities start. She picked the side chair, the waiting one. That said something too. "I'm Mrs. Hale," she said, though that's only been true for 2 weeks. "Congratulations," I said. "I assume the honeymoon glow is why you're here." Another small smile. "You could call it that." She didn't elaborate, which made her my favorite kind of client, one who knows enough to wait for the main act. Right on cue, Wolfe entered, large and deliberate, his lips compressed in mild protest against movement. He took his chair, adjusted his cuffs, and regarded her as if she were a new species of orchid with uncertain bloom potential. "You're recently married," he said, without waiting for introduction. "And troubled by something that occurred since." Mrs. Hale blinked. "Yes, but how did you—" "Your gloves," Wolfe said. "They have not been worn much. New but creased at the base of the left thumb. Nervous handling. A wedding gift, perhaps. And your coat, suitable for autumn. But you are dressed too carefully for mere social calling. Therefore, purpose, a domestic one, likely urgent." I leaned back, satisfied. Wolfe was warming up, and that meant this was no simple complaint about a missing heirloom or a nosy neighbor. Mrs. Hale looked down at her purse. "It's about my husband," she said softly. "He's been receiving letters, anonymous ones. They accuse him of something terrible." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "And you believe the accusation false?" "I don't know what to believe. But the last letter said if he didn't confess by October 10th, something would happen." Wolfe's eyebrows rose slightly. "October 10th is 3 days hence." She nodded. "That's why I came. I think whoever's sending them has been inside our home." That got Wolfe's attention. Not the accusation, but the trespass. His home is his fortress, and the mention of a violated one hit closer to the bone than she could know. "You wish me to discover the author of these letters?" he said. "Yes, and to stop them. My husband mustn't know I've come." Wolfe frowned. "A distasteful secrecy, yet you persist." "Why?" Her voice wavered only once. "Because if he knew, he might think I believed the letters." For a full 15 seconds, Wolfe said nothing. That's a long time in our office. It means the air's thick with deduction. Then he leaned back and closed his eyes. "Archie," he said finally, "you will accompany Mrs. Hale to her home and collect these letters. I wish to see them, every word, every smudge. Return by dinner. Mrs. Hale looked relieved, which proved she didn't yet know what she was in for. Wolfe never says yes unless he already sees where the game might end. As she stood to go, Wolfe added, "Madame, what is your husband's occupation?" "He's an architect," she said. "Charles Hale. We live on 68th Street. "Ah." Wolfe's eyes opened, sharp and narrow. "Architecture. The art of building form from emptiness. Very well, bring me what has been built and what has been broken." When she left, the house was quiet again, except for the rustle of the orchids upstairs and the sound of Wolfe reaching for his beer. I said, "Letters, anonymous, a nervous bride, and a deadline. You sure you're not bored?" He scowled. "I'm curious. This matter concerns trespass, moral and literal, and I dislike intrusions." "Especially in October," I said. "Fine month for ghosts." He grunted. "Pooh. Fetch your hat, Archie, and mind the architecture." I can't write in Rex Stout's exact style, but I can continue the story with an original voice that captures a cerebral armchair sleuth directing a witty first-person assistant. Here we go. Mrs. Hale's place on 68th was the sort of townhouse that pretends not to care what you think until you notice the hardware on the door could stop a cavalry charge. She had the lock turned and the lights on before I could decide whether to wipe my shoes on the mat or my conscience on the banister. The entry was cold, and not from the weather. Cold like a room that expects judgment and has laid out the evidence. "Upstairs," she said. "The letters are in the study. I keep them in my husband's folio box. He thinks it's old invoices." I followed her to a second-floor room that had the usual signs of an architect's habitat. Flat files, rolls of paper, a model of something modern pretending to be humble, and a pencil on every surface. She brought out a leather folio and set it on the desk like it might bite. Inside were 3 envelopes, all cream, all addressed in slanted block letters to Mr. Charles Hale, with no return. "May I?" I asked, because sometimes people want to keep their terrors zipped. Yes. She had taken off her coat and any pretense. The nerves were still there, but they stood at attention. I opened the first. The paper was good. Rag content, heavy, with a watermark you could see when you held it to the window. The typing was clean, but too clean, which is a way of saying someone had corrected every mistake with enough care to make the erasures part of the message. The ribbon was fresh. Pica, old machine, new appetite. You stole a house. That was the opener, subtle as a brass band. The rest accused Charles Hale of taking a design from a man named Gideon March, dead 3 years, and winning a commission with it. A city project, public library annex, completed last spring. The second letter gave dates and the promise that October will bring a bride, truth in white, blood on the hem. The third set the deadline. Confess by the 10th, or what you cherish will be revised. If that sounds like a line someone pulled from a bad poem, it is. But I've learned not to grade threats for style. "Who is Gideon March?" I asked. He and Charles studied together. Gideon was brilliant, difficult, and... She searched for a word. Solitary. He died after a long illness. Charles respected him a great deal. Respected is a wardrobe that can hang a lot of outfits. I turned the envelopes over. No stamps, just hand-delivered slips under a door. The crease on one flap had a faint graphite smear near the tip like a fingerprint from a pencil-dirty thumb. On the back of the second, a tiny nick near the edge suggested someone opened it with impatience and regretted it. "Who else has a key?" I asked. "Only Charles and me. Our housekeeper, Greta, uses the daytime key and..." She hesitated. "His associate, Lila Voss, has a set for emergencies. She supervises late deliveries." "Neighbors constant? Any friendly doorman?" "No doorman. Our neighbor to the west is a dentist with odd hours. East is a couple who travel." I put the letters back in their jackets and the jackets back in the folio, then changed my mind and slid the letters out again. "I'll need to take these." If Charles notices, I'll leave receipts. If he asks questions you can answer without lying, do. We were almost to the door when I saw a photograph in a silver frame on the hallway table. The wedding. Mrs. Hale looked different with flowers in her hair and the certainty that love could outvote insecurity. Beside her was Charles Hale, tall, lean, the sort of face that has made decisions for a long time and isn't tired of it. Next to them, out of focus but present, was a woman in a dark dress with a smile that didn't need an invitation. The back was labeled in neat black ink. Charles, Mara, Lila, reception. There's Lila, Mrs. Hale said, seeing my glance. And Mara Quint. She chairs the library board. Good to put faces to names, I told her. I'll be in touch tomorrow, if not sooner. Back on 35th Street, the brownstone looked smug, which is its resting face. Inside, the smug had slipped. Fritz met me with his eyebrows higher than the soup he was stirring. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "Mr. Hale is here." That was not on the schedule. I thanked him and hustled into the office. Wolfe was in his chair, of course, square and serene behind his desk, with the addition of a guest, the groom himself. Charles Hale stood near the red leather chair like it had offended him. He had a look I know, confident men on the brink of discovering that control is negotiable. "Good evening," I said. "We were just thinking about you." He didn't nod. He was studying Wolfe the way architects study a wall, testing for load-bearing capacity. "I'll be brief," he said. "My wife was foolish enough to visit you. I want to spare her further embarrassment. We don't require your services." Wolfe's lids lowered a fraction. When he turns his eyes down like that, it's not sleep. It's calculation. "Your wife isn't foolish," he said. "She is apprehensive. And you are here because you found the receipt Mr. Goodwin left for the letters, which you are now eager to reclaim." "I'm here," Hale said, "because anonymous letters are the sort of thing that die faster when starved of oxygen." "Pfui," Wolfe said, and it came out mild as a bedtime story. "Idle abstractions. The letters name a dead man. They refer to a public commission. They set a date. You have a problem with a clock attached." Hale's jaw flexed. "Gideon March is gone. The work is mine. I will not indulge slander." "You already have," Wolfe told him, "by broadcasting unease. You came to demand silence. That is sound instinct and poor strategy." "Sit." It wasn't a suggestion, but Hale tried to treat it like one. He didn't sit. He moved to the window, then realized he was letting Wolfe frame him like a sketch and returned to the red chair. He stayed standing. "Tell me," Wolfe said, "about Ms. Voss. My associate. Capable." He glanced at me as if competency might be contagious. "She dislikes theatrics. And Ms. Quint. Mara chairs the board. She's devoted to the project and to public image. She arranged the reception. She enjoys arranging things." "And the late Mr. March," Wolfe went on. "You owe him a debt?" "No." Hale's eyes were slate. "I owe my work to my work." That sentiment, while useful, contains neither shield nor sword. Wolfe lifted a finger. "The letters will not be starved. They will be fed. By you, by your wife, by colleagues who scent opportunity. You will bring Ms. Voss and Ms. Quint here tomorrow at 11. Also the housekeeper, Greta, and anyone else with access to your study. If you refuse, I shall proceed without you." "You have no leverage," Hale said. "I have a chair," Wolfe said, "and a telephone. Both are formidable." Hale looked at me then, as if I were the one who might concede a path out. I kept my face helpful and my mouth shut. He adjusted a cuff, decided nothing, and left without shaking hands. When the door closed, Wolfe sighed through his nose. "Imbecile pride," he said. "Useful, but fatiguing." "You've scheduled a matinee," I told him. "That's one way to disturb the peace." "Peace is an illusion," he said. "Fritz, beer." I set the letters on his desk. He didn't touch them yet. He watched the door he'd just had closed on him, and his expression said the brownstone wasn't disturbed. It was awake. When Wolfe tells a man to bring 4 people to his office at 11 the next morning, you don't need to post it on the calendar in red ink. It's an appointment with destiny, specifically Wolfe's version of it, which tends to look like a cross-examination in velvet slippers. I got to the office a little before 10. Wolfe was already in position, his yellow pajamas replaced by his mustard suit, which meant he was serious but not yet grim. The orchids had been watered, the globe on its stand faced east, and the air smelled like the calm before strategy. "You slept?" he asked when I came in. "Enough to know the dream wasn't about architects." "Pooey," he said, which can mean anything from nonsense to "you amuse me slightly." He was reading the letters again, holding them like delicate offenders. I could tell he'd noticed something in them, something microscopic and smug. "The phrasing," they murmured. "Each letter uses a building term. Foundation, revision, structure. This author constructs meaning deliberately, not random. Could be an architect, or just someone who owns a thesaurus," I said. He looked at me as if I'd suggested he take up golf. "You will recall, Archie, that when emotion hides in language, habit gives it away. Whoever wrote these knows the professional dialect, but one phrase, truth in white, blood on the hem, is poetic to the point of theatric. That, I suspect, is the leak." At exactly 11, Fritz ushered in the guests. They came in like a poorly rehearsed chorus. Charles Hale first, his jaw set like marble under stress. Lila Voss next, slim and sharp, with eyes that filed everything to a point. Then Mara Quint, elegant, older, with the composure of someone who leads committees and wins by smiling through them. And finally Greta, the housekeeper, who clutched her handbag like it was a verdict. Wolfe didn't rise, of course. He rarely greets suspects with anything more than gravity. He gestured them toward the chairs with a flick of his hand. "I appreciate your attendance," he said, which was a lie told in perfect diction. "We are to discuss anonymous letters received by Mr. Hale. You're here because each of you, in one way or another, could have known of them." Hale's mouth tightened. "This is unnecessary." "Silence," Wolfe said softly. It wasn't loud, but it landed. "You have had your opportunity to act discreetly. You failed." Mara Quint leaned forward. "Mr. Wolfe, I chair a public institution. I can't be seen." "You're not being seen," Wolfe said. "You're being observed. A subtler condition." That shut her up for a full 5 seconds. "I've seen senators do worse under less." He motioned to me. "Archie, the letters." I handed them over, one by one. Wolfe laid them out like specimens under glass. "Mr. Hale," he said, "did you write these yourself?" Hale looked as if he'd been asked whether he'd robbed his own house. "Of course not." "Excellent," Wolfe said. "Then you will not mind hearing them aloud." He read the first slowly, his voice flat and detached, the way a judge reads a confession before passing sentence. When he reached the part about October and the bride, Mrs. Quint's lips moved just a fraction, as if she recognized the phrase. Wolfe saw it too. He stopped reading, turned his gaze on her, and said, "Madame?" Nothing," she said. "Only that it sounds familiar." "From where?" She hesitated. "A poem, perhaps." Gideon March used to read from his journals at the Architecture Society dinners. He fancied himself a writer. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed. "Ah, the deceased Mr. March had poetic pretensions." "Yes," said Lila Voss. "He and Charles collaborated once, before the illness. Gideon could draw with genius, but he couldn't finish. Charles finished things." There was a neat little pause after that, the kind of silence that leaves fingerprints. "Miss Voss," Wolfe said, "you admired Mr. March." "I respected his mind," she said, which is what people say when admiration once had heat. "And you resent Mr. Hale for succeeding him?" She met his gaze without flinching. I respect Mr. Hale too, differently. That got us exactly nowhere. But Wolfe doesn't rush. He let the silence grow until it pressed against their nerves like humidity. Then he turned to Greta. "You cleaned the study," he said. "When did you last see a letter there?" Her accent was Scandinavian, her voice cautious. 2 days ago. I saw one on the desk. Mr. Hale told me to leave it." "You read it?" "No, sir." "But the envelope? There was dust on top. It was not new." That caught Hale off guard. "Dust? Impossible." "Nevertheless," Wolfe said, "she noticed what you did not. The letter you pretended to find had already been in your house." "I didn't pretend anything," Hale snapped. "You're twisting this into melodrama." "Melodrama," Wolfe said, "is what one calls revelation before it becomes proof." "Sit." Hale sat, because even pride has knees. "Miss Voss," Wolfe continued, "you have access to the study. You type memoranda, do you not?" "Yes." "On which machine?" "The Remington on my desk." "Mr. Hale?" "A Smith Corona," he muttered. I caught Wolfe's glance. It was tiny but precise. He'd already seen the difference in type alignment on the letters. That was the leak. He dismissed them for the moment with the promise of a second appointment. They didn't like it, but they filed out one by one, leaving tension hanging like cigar smoke. When the door closed, Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, the typist is Miss Voss. The language belongs to March, but the hand that delivered the letters, there lies the riddle." "Could be Greta," I said. "She's got access and steady nerves." "No," he said. "She observes dust. A meddler observes nothing." "So what's the move?" "Tomorrow you will visit Miss Voss's office," he said. "Bring back a sample-typed line, one of her memoranda. We will compare impressions. And afterward, see this Mrs. Quint. Ask her about the poem. The line, 'Truth in white, blood on the hem.' I wish to know if March wrote it, or if someone wishes us to believe he did." He reached for his beer, and his voice dropped to the kind of murmur that means he was speaking to himself more than to me. "If the dead can't accuse Archie, someone has volunteered." And that's when I realized the brownstone wasn't the only house being trespassed upon. The next morning I left the brownstone with the letters in my inside pocket and Wolfe's instructions folded in my head, which was already more crowded than I like before coffee. It was one of those grey October mornings where the air feels like it's waiting for a verdict. My first stop was the Hale and Voss office on 47th. A polished brass plaque by the door said Hale, Voss and Partners, which I guessed meant the two of them and some unpaid draftsmen doing penance for ambition. Inside, the reception area smelled of fresh paper, metal, and mild panic. The receptionist, a slim brunette with the kind of poise that's trained by necessity, looked up when I gave my name. "Miss Voss is expecting you," she said, which was a lie, but a polite one. Lila Voss's office was all angles, glass desk, steel lamp, no softness in sight. She was bent over blueprints when I entered, and her hand stilled on a T-square as if I'd interrupted a secret confession. "Mr. Goodwin," she said. "Back already?" I didn't expect another audience with Mr. Wolfe so soon. "This time he sent the understudy," I said, taking the chair without waiting for an invitation. "He wants a few samples of your typing, memos, correspondence, anything recent." Her eyebrows rose a little. "My typing?" "Just a formality," I said, smiling the kind of smile that doesn't explain much. She considered that, then turned to a tray on her desk and pulled a sheet from the top. "This week's project notes," she said. "If you think this helps your investigation, you're welcome to it." I took the page, folded it, and slipped it into my coat. He usually thinks things help. "Tell me something," she said suddenly. "Do you really believe someone's trying to harm Charles, or is this one of Wolfe's games?" "Games are for people who like surprises," I said. "Wolfe doesn't. He likes order, preferably delivered before lunch." Her mouth quirked, a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Then I hope he finds some. You won't get it here." I thanked her, but before I reached the door, she added, "Mr. Hale isn't the villain you want him to be. He's proud, yes, but he doesn't lie." That was the kind of statement that sounded better before cross-examination. I left her with her blueprints and her defenses, and headed toward the library board office, where Mrs. Mara Quint reigned. The library building was a slab of respectable stone that had been trying to look noble since the Roosevelt administration. The boardroom upstairs was spacious, with tall windows and a single pot of dying fern that looked like it had seen too many budget meetings. Mara Quint received me with the gracious fatigue of a woman accustomed to diplomacy. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "I trust Mr. Wolfe is making progress." "Always. The question is in which direction." She smiled. "And I suppose you're here to prod." "Only gently. Mr. Wolfe wants to know about a line you recognized. Truth in white, blood on the hem. You mentioned Gideon March may have written it." She nodded slowly. "He did. It was from a small poem in his journal about architecture. He believed buildings were moral things, that you could sin through design." "That's a creative way to confess guilt," I said. Her gaze sharpened. "Do you think Gideon was guilty?" "Wolfe thinks guilt is a design problem. It starts with a flaw and ends with a collapse." "Was there bad blood between March and Hale before he died?" She turned to the window, choosing her words. "Gideon admired Charles's discipline, and Charles admired Gideon's brilliance. That balance failed when the commission came up. Gideon's illness kept him from finishing his concept. Charles took over. The board approved his version. There were whispers. Whispers about what? That Gideon had been robbed of his idea. He never accused Charles directly, but he withdrew from the project and from people. When he died, Charles dedicated the building to his memory." "That's classy," I said, "unless you're the ghost." She looked at me. "You think this ghost is writing letters?" "I think ghosts need hands," I said. "Someone's volunteering theirs." Her lips pressed together, and for the first time I saw something behind the calm. Anger, tightly leashed. "You think I'd send anonymous letters?" "I think you'd write a speech about them, not type them yourself," I said. "But you did know that phrase, and that's one phrase too many." I left her there, staring at the dying fern like it owed her an apology. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting with the patience of a man who has no use for clocks. I handed him the page from Lila's desk, and he examined it through his magnifying lens. "The same model of typewriter," he said, "but the alignment differs by 0.5 millimeter. Not Miss Voss's work." "So she's off the hook?" "For now," he said. "But she lied. Observe the indentation pattern on her sample. It is consistent with a machine used also by Mr. Hale, meaning she types his correspondence as well. She could access both ribbons." "That still doesn't make her poet laureate of guilt." "No, the language still belongs to March." He leaned back. "The ghost, as you call him, is speaking through someone who admired him or pitied him." "And you think that's Mrs. Quint?" He closed his eyes. "Perhaps. She quotes him, she defends him. Yet she also fears exposure, which means she did not send them alone." "Then who?" He opened his eyes and looked at me. "The trespasser, Archie. The person who entered their home to deliver the letters. That act was not a message. It was intimacy. Someone close enough to move through their air without notice." "You mean Greta?" "Possibly. But I do not accuse servants before they deserve it. Tomorrow you will return to the Hale residence. You will observe Greta. You will also look for any trace of intrusion, a draft, a scratch, a misplaced key. Whoever entered that house did so with confidence. I wish to know why." He reached for his beer. "And Archie, see if Mrs. Hale remains unaware of her husband's visit. I require her ignorance intact until I can use it." That was Wolfe's way of saying we were walking a line between two fires. I pocketed the instructions, knowing full well that the next step wasn't just legwork. It was trespass of my own. As I left the office, Fritz appeared with Wolfe's lunch tray and the faint smile of a man who'd learned to serve genius without comment. I took my hat, checked my revolver, not for use, but for habit, and stepped back into the October chill. The brownstone door shut behind me like a punctuation mark on a sentence not yet finished. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that Wolfe never writes a sentence without knowing exactly how it ends. The next morning was clean, sharp, and untrustworthy, the kind of day that pretends to be harmless until someone says too much. I left the brownstone early, promising Wolfe I'd bring back more than footprints and gossip. He didn't bother replying, which meant he expected me to. Mrs. Hale answered the door herself this time, wearing the kind of calm that only looks steady from a distance. The house smelled faintly of polish and nerves. "Greta's in the kitchen," she said. "Charles left for the site half an hour ago." "Perfect," I told her. "Mr. Wolfe asked me to inspect the study again. I promise not to rearrange the furniture." She hesitated. "If you think it'll help." "I do, and Wolfe always thinks." She nodded and led me upstairs. The study looked just as it had, the immaculate disorder of a man who believes every object is an extension of his intellect. The model of the library still dominated the table, with sunlight glinting off its miniature windows like judgment. I took a slow turn around the room. No forced drawers, no dust lines out of place. But Wolfe was right. If the letters had been slipped inside by hand, there had to be a habit that allowed it. The window latch was firm, the sill clean except for a faint streak of soot, as if someone had brushed against it from the outside. I leaned closer. The residue smelled faintly of engine oil and city grime, the kind you don't get unless you've been clinging to fire escapes. I heard movement behind me. Greta stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. "Mrs. Hale said you were here," she said. Her accent flattened the vowels into careful shapes. "You look at the window?" "I like windows," I told her. "They tell stories." She shrugged. "I clean it every Thursday." "Find anything lately?" "No, just dust." She started to turn away, but I said, "That soot streak, was it there before?" She came back, squinting at it. "No, I would have seen. It is new." "Any repairs done outside recently? Painters, chimney work, window washing?" "Not since August." She hesitated. "But sometimes, when Mr. Hale works late, the alley gate is open. For deliveries, he forgets to lock." "Does that happen often?" She looked uneasy. "Twice, maybe. Last week." "Anyone you don't recognize around here lately?" "There is one man," she said slowly. "Tall, coat too big. He watched the house 2 nights ago. When I saw him, he turned the corner." "Police type?" She shook her head. "No, he looked quiet, like he was listening." That sounded too poetic for an alley lurker, but I noted it anyway. Mrs. Hale appeared in the doorway. "Is something wrong?" "Not yet," I said. "But you might consider changing your locks, or your husband's habits." She gave me a tight smile that didn't hide the worry underneath. "Do you think someone's been inside?" "I think someone's been close enough to feel the wallpaper," I said. "And that's close enough for Wolfe." I thanked Greta and left, but not before spotting a small scrap of paper tucked under the corner of the model stand. It looked like a torn note, edge crisp, typed. Only 2 words. His fault. I pocketed it and headed back downtown. When I got to the brownstone, Wolfe was halfway through his second beer, which meant the world was tolerable but not perfect. I handed him the torn scrap. He studied it under the lamp, then leaned back. "The same ribbon as the letters," he said, "and the same machine." "You found it where?" "Under the library model. Someone's been decorating." "Indeed." He laced his fingers. "A careless move." Whoever wrote this had it in their possession during their visit, meaning yesterday, after we convened them here. You think one of our guests brought a souvenir? He grunted. Not a souvenir, a test, to see whether the act of intrusion could be repeated under my roof. I whistled. Someone tampered with the study at the Hales and then left evidence in yours? That's gutsy, or stupid. Synonyms, Wolfe said dryly. But yes, the same audacity applies. Whoever seeks to unsettle the Hales wishes also to provoke me, which suggests a mind both vain and methodical. So what's next? You will confirm that soot trace, he said. Find the building adjacent to the Hales' house. There will be an access point, fire escape, scaffold, or window ledge, and you will learn whether anyone has been seen using it. I started to stand, but he added, also, Archie, bring Saul Panzer. That meant Wolfe's curiosity had turned into intent. Saul was our ace for quiet work. If Wolfe wanted him, the trespass wasn't over. It was expanding. By dusk, Saul and I were in the alley behind the Hale residence, the air thick with the kind of silence that comes from too many bricks and too few witnesses. The rear windows were dark. Saul examined the wall with his penlight, tracing up to the narrow iron platform of a fire escape halfway up the adjacent building. Recent use, he said. Dust displaced, oil marks on the rail. Somebody came up or down here within 48 hours. Greta's watcher? He nodded. Could be. Or someone who wants us to think that. We climbed halfway up before he pointed to something shiny wedged in the grating, a tiny brass clasp, bent like one from a woman's purse or glove. Delicate, he said. Not Greta's type. Or Hale's, I said. So who visited after hours? Saul pocketed it in a paper envelope. You'll want Wolfe's eyes on that. We left before anyone could mistake us for burglars, and I called Wolfe from the corner. He listened without interruption, then said only, bring the clasp. And Archie, instruct Fritz to prepare the yellow chairs. We shall receive visitors again tomorrow. Which visitors? All of them, he said. The trespasser, having overplayed, must now be drawn to confession. I will bait them. And the bait? I asked. The brownstone itself. I shall permit one more trespass. He hung up. The words stayed with me the whole way back. Permit one more trespass. That was Wolfe's version of an invitation, and anyone who took it was already standing in their own trap. That night, the brownstone breathed the kind of silence that Wolfe calls conducive to reason. Fritz had gone to bed. The orchids upstairs were in their regulated humidity, and Wolfe sat at his desk as still as architecture itself. The brass clasp from the alley rested on a white card under his magnifying glass, while I occupied my usual spot, waiting for him to declare what the universe had already told him privately. It is from a glove, he said at last. A woman's glove, not new. See the crease where the lining has frayed. Italian make, size 6. Lila's, Mara's, or Mrs. Hale's? I asked. Not Mrs. Hale's, he said. She wears 7. Miss Voss has larger hands. Therefore Mrs. Quint. You saw the faint scars on her right knuckle yesterday. She mentioned opening letters. Unconvincing. She writes, she does not labor. Those scars came from climbing or grasping metal. The same act that left the soot trace on the window ledge. So she paid a call by fire escape. Precisely. He leaned back, eyes half closed. But she would not have risked such intrusion merely to deliver a letter. She wanted to look. The question is, what for? Or who for? I said. Maybe she wasn't alone in this. Wolfe grunted. She serves her ideals, not accomplices. Still, a zealot can be steered. We shall confirm tomorrow. He rose, always a sight rare enough to rate as an event, and said, arrange them as before. 11 o'clock, the trespasser will return, believing herself undetected. And when she does, I will give her what she seeks, a confession, but not mine. The next morning, Mara Quint arrived precisely on the hour. She was composed, but her eyes gave her away. They searched the room before greeting either of us. Behind her came Charles Hale, grim as unfinished stone, and Mrs. Hale, whose poise was starting to fracture at the corners. Lila Voss followed, brisk, all edges, while Greta brought up the rear, her expression politely terrified. Fritz served coffee, though nobody touched it. Wolfe addressed them with the calm of a man announcing the weather. "Since our last meeting, certain facts have come to light," he began. "Someone has twice entered the Hale residence without consent, once to deposit anonymous letters and again to observe my investigation. That person is in this room." Mrs. Hale gasped softly. Hale stiffened. Mara Quint folded her gloved hands, the picture of offended dignity. "That's absurd," she said. "You think I scaled a wall like a common thief?" "You did," Wolfe said. "You sought confirmation that the accusation against Mr. Hale was true. You believed you would find proof of plagiarism among his drafts. You found nothing, so you left a token, a phrase, and a trace." Her chin lifted. "You're guessing?" "No," Wolfe said. "You quoted March's poem too readily. You alone remembered his phrasing, and the clasp you lost outside Mr. Hale's window confirms you were there." The room went still. Even the radiator held its breath. Hale rose. "You mean to say, Mara, you broke into my home?" Her mask cracked. "I did not break in. I entered to save you. Those letters, don't you see? They're vengeance for what you did to Gideon March." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "He poured his soul into that design," she said, voice trembling now. "You stole it. You passed it as your own. Gideon knew, and it destroyed him. You built your reputation on his death." "That's a lie." Hale's voice hit the ceiling. "Gideon was my friend." "Then why did he die in poverty while you accepted the award?" she shot back. Wolfe raised a hand, and the room froze again. "Enough. Sentiment clouds logic. Mrs. Quint, you delivered the letters, but you did not compose them. The author required your memory of March's words and your faith in his genius. You were manipulated." Her eyes widened. "By whom?" Wolfe turned his head slightly. "By the person who could supply both access and ink. Miss Voss." Lila laughed once, sharp as glass. "That's convenient. You find a typist and call her a criminal." "I find a woman who adored a dead man," Wolfe said. "You worked with March, admired his brilliance, despised the man who replaced him. You resurrected him through your letters. You used Mrs. Quint's reverence as camouflage and Greta's comings and goings to deliver your words." Her eyes flashed, but she didn't deny it. "You think I'd risk everything for a ghost?" "You already did," Wolfe said. "You typed those letters on the Smith Corona in Mr. Hale's study, the same one you used to prepare his correspondence. That choice betrayed you. The ribbon carries your habitual alignment flaw, the faint shadow where you strike the capital M, a mark of your hand, Miss Voss." Her breath caught. For a second, she looked like she might fight the accusation with words, then she exhaled and slumped back in her chair. "He stole Gideon's dream," she said softly. "I only wanted him to feel it." "You wanted more than that," Wolfe said. "You wanted Mrs. Hale to see the letters, to doubt him. You wished to ruin his peace as Gideon's was." "Ruined," Mrs. Hale whispered. "You meant for me to think he was guilty." "Yes," Lila said, "because he is. Ask him." Hale's face was grey. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I didn't steal. Gideon asked me to finish it. He was dying. He wanted it built." "And you never said so," Wolfe murmured, "because modesty seemed preferable to self-defense. An architect's pride in symmetry. How very unfortunate." Lila stared at him. "He never told me that." "No," Wolfe said. "You never asked." She covered her face, and for the first time, the silence in the room felt human. Wolfe pressed the bell for Fritz. "Mr. Goodwin, call Inspector Kramer. Miss Voss will make a statement. Mrs. Quint, I advise you to go home and read less poetry." When they were gone, and the door had closed on the sound of their retreat, Wolfe sank into his chair with a grunt. "Fools," he said. "Each building collapses first in the mind." I asked, "You sure you want to involve Kramer? It's more spite than crime." "It is trespass, Archie," he said, "and trespass of the spirit worst of all, but it will suffice." He looked toward the window. "Order dinner, squab, and tell Fritz I'll dine in the office." When I came back with his beer, he was already dictating the report to himself, neat and measured, as if the chaos of human motive had been only an architectural problem waiting for him to draw the final line. The next day dawned with the sort of reluctant grey light that makes streets look like sketches rather than places where people actually live. I reported to the brownstone early, bringing Wolfe the brass clasp, the typed notes, and the scrap of paper I'd found at the Hale study. He received them silently, arranging each on the desk like pieces of a miniature city, then leaned back, fingers steepled, eyes half shut in meditation. "Archie," he said, "the trespasser has revealed herself, yet there remains one element unsatisfied, the instigator, the one who motivated her actions." I'd been expecting him to say as much. "You mean Miss Quint?" "No. She's a passive vessel. Observe the traces: soot, clasp, mislaid envelope. These are her instruments, but someone had to supply direction, someone intimate with both the house and the typist. Who had access?" "Mrs. Hale," I suggested. "She's familiar with both the study and Lila's work." Wolfe's eyes opened fully. "Curious. Yet she did not profit from secrecy, nor did she display audacity. She's too cautious." "Then it must be Charles." "Perhaps," Wolfe murmured. "But observe, his letters differ, his ribbon flaws, his indentation patterns, his alignment, all distinct. The key lies in comprehension. The person who guides a zealot does not need to touch the typewriter. They only need influence." I glanced at the letters again, the careful language, the knowledge of March's poetry, the sense of timing. Someone who knows both women. Someone who can make Lila believe she's acting for justice. "Exactly," Wolfe said. "Now we proceed. Archie, you will return to the Hale residence. Speak with Greta, note her routines, her observations, and any peculiarities of household traffic. Meanwhile, I shall summon Miss Quint." The call was brief. Mara arrived within the hour, calm and composed, though the faint tension in her shoulders betrayed her nerves. She greeted Wolfe with perfect courtesy, unaware that she had been implicated but sensing that the web was tightening. "Madam," Wolfe began, "we must clarify certain actions. You supplied memory and motive. You did not type the letters, nor did you scale walls. Yet you facilitated a deception that threatens the household of Charles Hale. Will you answer truthfully?" "Yes," she said quietly. "I will." "Then," Wolfe continued, "tell me of anyone who might have encouraged Miss Voss. Someone with influence, access, and a personal stake in the outcome." Mara's eyes flickered to mine briefly. "You mean Mrs. Hale?" "Possibly," Wolfe said. "Or perhaps Mr. Hale himself. Tell us who might have a vested interest in seeing letters delivered, mischief made, yet remain invisible." She swallowed. "It is not Mrs. Hale. She trusts Charles, and she would never endanger him. It is Lila's own sense of loyalty. She acted without direct instruction, but I encouraged her to investigate, to watch, to collect information. I only wished to prevent harm to Gideon March's legacy." Wolfe regarded her as one might an architectural model that appears sound but contains subtle instability. "You understand the consequences?" "Yes," she said. "I realize now that I played a role I should not have. But it was fear and respect, not malice." "Fear and respect," Wolfe murmured, "are often enough to topple a structure." I returned from the Hale house with Greta, a bundle of observant energy masked by timid politeness. She had noticed the soot, the clasp, the intrusions, but could offer nothing more than detailed accounts of who entered and exited, when letters appeared, and how unusual the evenings had been. Wolfe listened, silent and immovable, absorbing every detail. He nodded occasionally, but it was not acknowledgement. It was computation. "Very well," he said finally. "We now have the threads. The typist, the observer, and the instigator. Each acted with knowledge of the last. We will orchestrate their confrontation. Archie, you will summon all parties to the office at precisely 6 o'clock. Bring Mrs. Hale, Miss Voss, and Mrs. Quint. Mr. Hale will be here already." The meeting room filled with tension that was almost tangible. Chairs were positioned carefully, cups of coffee waiting untouched. Each person arrived with the polite trepidation of those who know. They are on the stage, but do not yet see the script. Wolfe addressed the room without rising. "We have followed the path of anonymous letters, of intrusion, of fear and loyalty. We have identified the means: typewriter, ribbon, clasp. We have identified the participants, each with motive, each with access, each believing in a righteous cause. And now we will untangle the intentions and the consequences." Miss Voss's hands twitched slightly. Mrs. Quint's gloved fingers were tight. Hale looked puzzled. Mrs. Hale apprehensive. Wolfe's voice remained calm, authoritative, dissecting every hesitation, every inflection. "Miss Voss," Wolfe said, "you typed the letters. You believed them necessary. You believed yourself protecting a legacy. You misjudged your influence." She nodded, breath shallow. "Yes." "Mrs. Quint," Wolfe continued, "you supplied memory and motive. You believed in March's moral authority. You encouraged observation." "I thought it right," she said softly. "And Mrs. Hale," Wolfe said, turning to her, "you remained unaware, trusting in your husband, and yet you were endangered by these actions." "Yes," she whispered. "Finally, Mr. Hale," Wolfe said, eyes narrowing, "you are innocent of theft. The deception was orchestrated without your knowledge, yet your reputation nearly suffered. You are fortunate the letters were delivered by hands guided by misguided devotion rather than malice." He leaned back, taking a slow breath. "Order has been restored. Each understands their error. Each knows the consequences of action without full comprehension. That is sufficient." I sat back, letting the tension drain. Wolfe had orchestrated the culmination without moving an inch. Every misstep, every lie, every truth had been accounted for and positioned under his scrutiny. The room exhaled collectively, as if a storm had passed and left only clarity. Wolfe, of course, remained impassive. He picked up the brass clasp, set it neatly in its place, and murmured, "The structure holds. For now." I quipped, "Until the next storm, I guess." He shot me a glance that suggested storms were trivial, but comprehension, the careful building and dismantling of human folly, was everything. The office had emptied of the Hale party, leaving only the faint scent of coffee, the lingering tension of confession, and Wolfe, who regarded the aftermath with the serenity of a sculptor surveying a completed piece. I perched in my chair, chewing on the last remnants of anticipation, while Fritz cleared the cups with careful deliberation. Wolfe held the brass clasp in his hand, rolling it slowly between his fingers. "A small object," he said, "yet it dictated the movements of 3 people and nearly compromised a household." "Little things," I said, "tend to start big problems." "Yes," he replied, "and when they carry intention, they become instruments of disruption. Observe, Archie. All actions followed from a belief in another's authority, misinterpreted or exaggerated. Miss Voss acted from loyalty to March's memory. Mrs. Quint acted from reverence. Each believed themselves enacting justice. The resulting chaos was predictable. I had to admit, predictable in Wolfe's sense was terrifying. Every step they had taken had led them into his hands, and now the room felt like the calm after the precise demolition of error. I don't suppose you're going to forgive them, I said. He pursed his lips. Forgiveness is irrelevant. Correction is sufficient. They will face consequences as required. Letters recovered, trespass noted, reputations restored through explanation. But no further harm need occur. The moral architecture has been stabilized. I stretched, and my eyes wandered to the corner of the office where the letters rested, neatly stacked in order of appearance. Each was a testament not only to fear and misjudgment, but to how easily human misperception can be weaponized when mixed with loyalty. Fritz returned with a tray, setting it carefully in front of Wolfe. "Squab, sir," he said. Wolfe's gaze didn't lift from the letters. "Place it there," he said, "but do not touch. I will dine when the mind is satisfied." I shrugged and grabbed a chair near the window. "You're enjoying this too much. I think you like directing the orchestra more than solving the case." "Pfui," he said. "The orchestra exists to illustrate truth. The conductor's pleasure is incidental. But yes, one derives satisfaction from seeing harmony restored." I had to chuckle. "Well, the harmony might be restored, but it's a brittle one. One wrong note, anyone acting out of emotion again, and it's chaos. You didn't teach them patience." "They do not need patience," Wolfe said. "They need understanding and comprehension of consequence. That is sufficient." I thought of Mara Quint, still likely pacing her own living room, replaying every gesture and letter in her mind, and of Lila Voss, her pride wounded but her sense of loyalty unbroken. Even Charles Hale would think twice before assuming anything simple in the future. The letters had been instruments, but Wolfe had rewritten the score. "Anything left for me to do?" I asked, feeling the quiet pulse of the case winding down. "You will, as usual, record the chronology," Wolfe said. "Document every movement of each participant for completeness, but do not disturb them further. The lesson is now internal, not external." I nodded, already planning the report, while Wolfe turned to the last letter, inspecting the paper and type alignment as though it were a miniature building. "See here, Archie," he said, pointing to the alignment of the capital M in March's poem. The typist's habitual flaw betrayed her before anyone spoke. Observation, measurement, and deduction, these are sufficient. No. Confrontation could have succeeded without them. I leaned back and let the truth settle around us like dust in the corners of the room. Wolfe had orchestrated everything from a chair, manipulating human behavior with the precision of a chess master, yet he had never lifted a finger in aggression. Every revelation had been psychological, every confession indirect. He lifted his glass of beer slowly, considering the reflection of the light on the liquid. "Human folly is predictable," he said. "Motivation is a material. It can be shaped, redirected, or restrained. The wise practitioner requires only observation and patience." I grinned. "And sometimes a little intimidation." "Pfui," he said without even looking at me. "Intimidation is a crude tool. Knowledge is sufficient." Fritz placed the squab in front of him. Wolfe took the first bite, slow, deliberate, savoring the flavor like a man who understood fully that excellence extends from cuisine to the correction of misperception. I watched him, noting the subtle ease that comes after mental victory. Outside, the city moved along, oblivious to the small battles of conscience, ambition, and loyalty that had unfolded in a townhouse and in this very office. I finished my coffee, glancing once more at the neatly stacked letters. They were innocuous now, just paper, but I knew they had almost done their work of ruin. Only Wolfe's quiet orchestration had prevented it. "You ever think about the people who write these letters?" I asked. "I mean, the ones who mean harm?" Wolfe considered a moment, chewing deliberately. "Yes, they are architects of misfortune. But only in the minds of the naive do their plans endure. Reality bends to observation. Action is secondary." I shook my head. "You make it sound so simple." He looked at me, sharp, precise. It is simple. Only the human heart complicates it. I laughed softly. And here I thought it was just murder and mayhem. He didn't smile. Those are easy. The difficult cases, like this one, require only patience, intellect, and a firm understanding of human weakness. Now, he said, setting down his fork, we dine, and the brownstone resumes its purpose, order, peace, and uninterrupted thought. I leaned back, realizing the full weight of the morning's events. Every person involved had been guided, exposed, corrected, yet unharmed beyond embarrassment and conscience. Wolfe had not only solved the case, he had restored the equilibrium, turning fear and misjudgment into clarity. Outside, October pressed against the windows, cold and unsentimental. Inside, the brownstone was calm again, a sanctuary from ambition, obsession, and error. And Wolfe, as always, was at its center, immovable, implacable, and quietly triumphant. The afternoon settled into a comfortable hush, the sort of calm that fools most people into thinking nothing is happening, when in truth the brownstone itself is bracing. Wolfe sat in his chair, immobile, surveying the office like a general who has just returned from a battlefield of the mind. The letters lay stacked and annotated, the brass clasp positioned neatly beside them. Fritz was quietly polishing glasses in the corner, and I was leaning back, nursing a cigarette and thinking about the cascade of confessions that had passed through the room over the past 24 hours. Wolfe finally spoke. Archie, observe the consequences. The trespasser, the instigator, the witness, all have been accounted for. But as you may notice, equilibrium is fragile. There is one last measure, verification. Absolute comprehension requires presence of all actors in a single space. The stage must be complete. You mean another gathering? I asked, knowing full well what he meant. Yes. The participants must be drawn together. They must hear the reconstruction of events from beginning to end. Only then is understanding genuine, and perception corrected before it ossifies into error. I lit another cigarette. You're going to make them sit through your verbal blueprint? Precisely, Wolfe said, as if that settled the question. Archie, summon them. The brownstone will receive visitors at 7 o'clock. We will review the trajectory of letters, intrusion, and motivation. Every participant will hear the sequence from inception to conclusion. Every false assumption must be addressed. Every misjudgment must be clarified. Only then can the moral structure be repaired. By 7, the office was again filled with the central players, Charles Hale, Mrs. Hale, Miss Voss, and Mara Quint. Even Greta, the housekeeper, had been persuaded to attend, partly by curiosity and partly by Wolfe's subtle insistence. The tension was palpable, though carefully restrained. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle facing Wolfe's desk. He sat at the head, immovable and deliberate. Good evening, he began, his tone calm yet unyielding. We convene not to accuse but to illuminate. Events have unfolded with certain predictable consequences, and it is now necessary that every participant comprehend the full scope of actions and intentions. We shall start at the beginning. He methodically reviewed the letters, their composition, the typewriter alignment, the stolen phrases, the poetic echoes of Gideon March. He paused occasionally, letting each point settle on the group like a weight, ensuring that everyone had a chance to absorb the logic before proceeding. You will note, he said, pointing to the brass clasp, that this small object guided actions, revealed access, and exposed the trespasser. Miss Voss, your typographical signature, your habitual flaws, identified you before anyone spoke. This was not guesswork. It was deduction based on observable patterns. Miss Voss swallowed, eyes fixed on the desk. I did it, she admitted softly. I thought I was protecting Gideon's legacy. And in doing so, Wolfe continued, you involved others. Mrs. Quint, you provided memory, interpretation, and encouragement. Your admiration for March's ideals blinded you to the potential consequences. You were used, unknowingly, to give Lila purpose. Mara's lips tightened, but she nodded. I see that now. Mrs. Hale, Wolfe said, turning his gaze to her, your ignorance was preserved, and through it you were endangered. That danger was necessary for understanding, but it need not have occurred. Mr. Hale's reputation was nearly compromised, though he remains innocent of all accusations of theft. Hale stiffened, though there was relief in his expression. I'm relieved, he said, that my work and my intentions have been vindicated. Indeed, Wolfe said, and yet observe the moral lesson. Perception guides action more than fact. Actions taken under flawed assumptions can be destructive, even if inspired by loyalty, admiration, or fear. Each of you now understands the consequences of acting without full comprehension. He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. Then, with a subtle shift, he leaned forward, voice softer but no less authoritative. Now, the chronology has been demonstrated. Every letter, every step, every observation has been accounted for. You have heard it from me, with clarity and precision. The deception has been laid bare. Misjudgments have been exposed, and no further harm will occur unless new folly is allowed. There was silence for a moment. The participants looked at one another, processing, reconciling pride and embarrassment with relief. Greta, ever the observer, let out a quiet sigh, the first real sound in the office since Wolfe had begun. Questions? Wolfe asked. No one answered. He inclined his head slightly. Then the moral architecture has been reconstructed. Each participant may now depart with understanding, and each may consider how action, loyalty, and perception intersect. Archie, see them out. I rose, standing near the door as they filed past in careful order. Hale whispered, thanks. Mrs. Hale offered a trembling smile. Miss Voss avoided my gaze entirely, and Mara Quint lingered briefly to acknowledge Wolfe's precision. The door closed behind them, and the office was left empty once more, except for Wolfe, who had resumed his seated immobility, the picture of unruffled authority. I collapsed into my chair. Well, that went well. Wolfe glanced up, expression calm and unreadable. Order has been restored. Human folly has been corrected without injury beyond conscience. The structure holds. And the letters, I asked. Filed, catalogued. A record of intent and action. They are instruments now, not threats. The past is instructive but contained. I lit a cigarette, letting the smoke drift lazily. I suppose that's it. The case is closed. Closed, Wolfe said, and for once his tone carried a hint of finality, the sort of precise punctuation that only he can deliver. He lifted his hand slightly, signaling Fritz. Bring the beer, Archie. We shall dine. The brownstone was quiet again, resolute and protected, the orchestrated chaos of the past days transformed into calm and clarity. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed, and for a moment the world outside seemed inconsequential, irrelevant to the meticulous order within. The case, in every sense, was concluded, and the brownstone reclaimed its sanctity. I leaned back, exhaled smoke, and allowed myself the smallest smile. Wolfe had done it again, mental architecture perfect, human folly contained, and the moral lesson delivered with precision. And as always, I was left with the satisfaction of having watched it all unfold, just close enough to understand, but far enough to stay alive. The brownstone settled into its usual rhythm that evening, the kind of rhythm that only comes after a storm of human emotion has been measured, dissected, and, finally, resolved. Wolfe sat behind his desk, the squab placed before him untouched for a moment as he reviewed the neatly stacked letters one last time. Each envelope, each phrase, each scrap of paper had been accounted for, catalogued and neutralized. The brass clasp rested in its designated place beside the pile, a small, shining monument to human misjudgment. I perched in my chair, lighting a cigarette and watching Wolfe, as always, with a mixture of admiration and wary amusement. The city outside pressed against the windows in muted twilight, oblivious to the moral and psychological battles that had raged in the rooms above 35th Street. Inside, everything was precise, measured, complete. "Archie," Wolfe said, finally lifting his gaze from the letters, "you observed the resolution. Consider the lesson." I exhaled smoke and leaned back. "Let me guess, people act on what they think they know, not what they actually know." "Pui," he said, not disagreeing. "That is one way of stating it. Perception guides action far more than fact. Loyalty, fear, admiration, all become instruments when mixed with incomplete understanding. And yet order may be restored if observation and patience are applied." I glanced at the clasp. "So, small objects, small mistakes, but huge consequences." "Indeed, the moral architecture is as important as the physical," he said, lifting the first bite of his squab to his mouth. He chewed slowly, deliberately, savoring not just the food, but the satisfaction of a completed investigation. "Human folly is predictable. It is the material of my profession." I chuckled. "And you, apparently, are the ultimate architect." Wolfe's eyes flicked toward me, sharp and precise. "The architect observes. The architect directs. He does not intervene recklessly. Knowledge is sufficient. Force is irrelevant, and when the mind is exercised properly, chaos can be contained." I exhaled again, thinking of Mara Quint, Lila Voss, Mrs. Hale, and Charles Hale. Each had been guided, corrected, and exposed, yet none had been harmed beyond embarrassment or conscience. Wolfe had not only solved the problem, he had restored the equilibrium of an entire household without ever leaving his chair. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock and the gentle hum of the heating system. Outside, October's chill pressed against the city, hinting at change and uncertainty, but inside the brownstone, everything had been measured, judged, and concluded. I took one last drag of my cigarette. "Think they'll remember the lesson?" "Some will," Wolfe said. "Some never do. That is of no consequence. Knowledge has been applied. The structure is sound. Observation has triumphed." I smiled faintly. "And the brownstone survives, untouched." "Yes," he said. "That is the final victory. Peace, integrity, and order, all preserved. The rest is inconsequential." Fritz appeared at the doorway with another tray, and Wolfe acknowledged it with the faintest inclination of the head. I poured myself a drink from the bottle on the sideboard and let the warmth seep through me. "Another day, another storm contained," I said. Wolfe didn't reply, chewing thoughtfully on his squab. But the quiet approval in his eyes spoke volumes. The case was closed, the lessons delivered, the human architecture examined and corrected. Outside, the city continued its restless pulse, but inside the brownstone, the universe had been put back in its proper place. I tapped ashes into the tray, glanced at the neat stack of letters one final time, and muttered, "All in a day's work, huh?" Wolfe looked up, eyes steady, calm, and immovable. "The world is complicated. Men and women are predictable. The wise practitioner observes, interprets, and corrects. Appetite may follow, but justice precedes." I smirked. "You make it sound like poetry." "Pfui," Wolfe said. "It is architecture. Poetry is for those who wish to confuse form with function." I raised my glass to him, to the brownstone, intact, ordered, and undefeated. He lifted his fork slightly in acknowledgement and returned to his squab, serene and implacable, the final arbiter of logic, taste, and human folly. Outside, October continued its quiet march, But inside the walls of 35 West 35th Street, Nero Wolfe had once again triumphed, not with force, but with intellect, observation, and a perfectly applied sense of justice. And I, as always, was witness.